The first time my father realized he had been wrong about me happened in a room full of strangers. Not in our kitchen. Not at the dining table where he used to decide what kind of daughter I was going to be. It happened in a packed auditorium in Seattle, the kind of place my father used to talk about with a certain tone in his voice. Doctors, investors, researchers, people discussing ideas that could change the world. For him, rooms like that were a kind of private club, reserved for the brilliant and the powerful. And that afternoon, I was the one standing on the stage. The lights were so bright I could barely see past the first few rows. Just dark shapes in expensive suits. The low hum of the projector behind me, and someone coughing quietly somewhere in the back of the hall. I was halfway through explaining the data when something shifted near the front. 3 people moving down the aisle, guided by a conference volunteer who looked slightly uncomfortable. Later, I would learn they had introduced themselves as my family and insisted on being seated. My father, my mother, and my brother. For a moment, my mind simply stopped. Seeing someone from your past appear in a place tied to everything they once said you could never become has a strange effect. It makes the room feel smaller. My father, Richard Carter, leaned back in the front row as if he belonged there. His phone was already raised, recording the stage. Of course it was. I kept talking, explaining the protein pathway our team had mapped. The words came automatically. Months of rehearsing will do that. Still, my eyes kept drifting toward him. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. Thinner, but he was still wearing those tailored suits he loved, the kind that probably cost more than the used car I had driven for 3 years. Nathan sat beside him, shoulders hunched, pale, staring down at the floor instead of the stage. That part almost made me laugh, because Nathan Carter had spent most of his life telling people he was going to be a surgeon, Duke pre-med, the family genius, the son my father invested everything in. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who supposedly didn't have the mind for science. But that part of the story started years earlier. My name is Amelia Carter, 28 years old, and 4 years before that conference in Seattle. My father slid a pink brochure across our kitchen counter and told me I wasn't smart enough for the life I wanted. The kitchen smelled like garlic and burnt butter. My mom had been cooking all afternoon, the way she always did when Nathan came home from school. My brother sat at the island scrolling his phone like he owned the place. My father stood at the sink rinsing a glass. Slow, careful, the way he did everything. Nobody asked me about my day. Finally, I said it anyway. I got the acceptance letter today. Nathan didn't even look up. My mom smiled politely. That's nice. Honey. My father dried his hands on a towel. Acceptance where University of Washington. I said, biochemistry program. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Nathan snorted. Biochemistry, he said. Since when? Since always? I said. My father walked over to the counter and picked up the envelope I had placed there earlier. He didn't open it, just turned it over once in his hands. How much is the tuition? About $30,000 a year. I said, but I can take out loans. I just need a guarantor signature. Nathan finally looked up. You need Dad to co-sign just the federal paperwork. I said. My father nodded slowly. Then he reached into his briefcase. At first, I thought he was pulling out a pen. Instead, he slid something glossy across the counter toward me. Pink, shiny, smiling women on the front, Seattle Institute of Cosmetology. I stared at it. I didn't ask for this. My father folded his arms. Amelia, he said calmly. Science requires a certain caliber of intellect. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Translation, he said. Not you. I felt my face get hot. I graduated near the top of my class. Nathan laughed. That high school wasn't exactly MIT. My mom tried the soft voice she used when things got uncomfortable. Sweetheart, cosmetology is a perfectly respectable career. I pushed the brochure back toward my father. I don't want respectable. I want the lab. My father didn't move the brochure. You're not built for that environment. And Nathan as Nathan raised his glass like a toast. Obviously. I looked straight at my father. So, you're not signing the form. He didn't hesitate. No. Just like that. Dinner kept going after that. Plates passed around. People chewing. Nobody mentioning what had just happened. I swear the quiet part hurt more than the words. After a while, I stood up. I'm done here. My mom looked up. You're not even going to finish dinner. No! Nathan called after me as I walked toward the stairs. Good luck with the hairdryers. Nobody stopped me from packing that night. Nobody came to the door when I left. Have you ever realized your family already decided who you were long before you had a chance to prove them wrong? I left Bellevue with 2 bags and about $800 in my checking account. That's it. No big goodbye. No dramatic speech. I just loaded my car while the house was quiet and drove south toward Seattle. The first place I could afford was an apartment above a dry cleaner. The hallway always smelled like hot detergent and chemicals. Honestly, it kind of burned your nose. But it was cheap. The landlord handed me the keys and said, "You sure you want to live above those machines? I can sleep through anything." I told him. That part wasn't exactly true. The machines downstairs started running at 6 every morning. Loud metal thumping through the floor. But after a while, your brain stops noticing. You get used to things when you don't have other options. 3 days after moving in, I walked into a salon downtown and asked for a job. The manager looked at me for maybe 2 seconds. "You have experience? No. You good with people I can pretend." She laughed. Honest answer. That's rare. Her name was Dana. She handed me a black apron. You start by washing hair. That became my life for a while. Wash, sweep, mop, repeat. One night, a woman in the chair asked me, "So what are you studying biochemistry?" I said. Donna looked over from the front desk. "You serious?" "Yeah." She crossed her arms. "Then what are you doing here?" "Paying rent." After closing one night, she counted the register and said quietly, "College kids quit this job all the time." "I won't." I told her. She raised an eyebrow. "You think you're tougher than the rest, I don't think." I said, "I know." She studied me for a second, then nodded. "All right. Lab girl." Most nights after work, I took the bus across the city to community college classes, organic chemistry, biology, statistics. Half the time I was so tired I barely remembered driving home, but every exam score was a little reminder that my father had been wrong. 94, 97, 98. One afternoon after a test, the professor stopped me on my way out of the room. "Amelia," she said, "we need to talk. You ever have someone look at you like they see something you're still trying to prove exists?" The classroom smelled faintly like dry erase marker and stale coffee. Everyone was packing their bags when I heard my name. Amelia. Wait a second. It was the professor, Dr. Laura Bennett. I walked back to the front desk, still holding my exam paper. She tapped the page once. 98. I shrugged. Got lucky. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe that for a second. "You know the class average was 58. I studied." "That's not studying," she said. "That's mastery." I laughed a little. My father would disagree. She leaned back in her chair. "Your father's a scientist." "No," I said. "He's a lawyer." "Then he should know better than to evaluate data without evidence." That caught me off guard. "Doctor." Bennett folded her arms. "So, tell me something," she said. "Why are you taking community college classes when you clearly belong in a research lab?" I hesitated. "Long story. I have time." I told her the short version. The brochure. The dinner. My father deciding I wasn't built for science. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she nodded once. "Your father made a prediction." She said, "Yeah. And you decided to test it." "I guess." She turned toward her computer and typed something quickly. Then she printed a page and slid it across the desk. University of Washington Transfer Program. You should apply, she said. I can't afford that. You can if someone writes the right recommendation. I stared at the paper. You'd do that. She raised an eyebrow. Amelia, professors don't write letters because they like students. Then why? Because they recognize potential. I didn't say anything for a second. Then I asked quietly, what if my father's right, doctor? Bennett smiled in a way that felt almost dangerous. Then science will prove it. She stood up and grabbed her bag. And if he's wrong, she added, that'll be even more fun to watch. Have you ever met someone who believed in you before you were ready to believe in yourself? The house in Bellevue smelled like roasted turkey and lemon cleaner. Same as always. Some things never change. I stood in the doorway for a second before walking in. Nobody noticed me right away. Nathan was already talking. I'm telling you, the workload at Duke is insane, he said. Pre-med isn't for the weak. My father nodded like he was listening to a lecture from a Nobel Prize winner. That's my boy, he said. My mom saw me first. Amelia, you made it. Nathan glanced over. Well, look who escaped the beauty salon. Still in school, I said calmly. My father pulled out a chair for me like everything was normal. Sit down, he said. Dinner started the way it always did. My father asking Nathan questions he already knew the answers to. How's organic chemistry going, Brutal? Nathan said. Half the class dropped. My father smiled proudly. Good programs weed people out. Nathan took a sip of wine and looked at me. So, what are you studying again, biochemistry? He laughed. Right. My father looked over his glasses. Amelia, have you considered something more practical? Like what? He gestured vaguely. You know, applied skills. Nathan jumped in. Hair dryers, scissors, that sort of thing. My mom tried to smooth things over. Your sister works very hard. Nathan shrugged. Hard work doesn't equal ability. I set my fork down. You know what else doesn't equal ability? He smirked. What's that? Talking about? Classes you haven't passed yet? The table went quiet. My father's voice turned sharp. That's enough. Nathan leaned forward. You think you're smarter than me? No, I said. I think I study... My father stood up slightly from his chair. This isn't a competition. Isn't it? I said. He pointed toward the kitchen counter. Your brother is studying medicine at one of the best universities in the country. And I'm studying science. I said. Nathan laughed again. Community college science. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. I didn't open it, just placed it next to my plate. My father glanced at it. What's that? Nothing you need to worry about. I finished dinner quietly after that. Nobody asked about the envelope again, but inside it was the letter confirming something I hadn't told them yet. My research fellowship at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center. Ever sit through a whole dinner knowing you're the only person at the table who understands how wrong everyone else is? I went back to the house in Bellevue about 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner. Not to visit, just to pick up a winter coat I had left behind. The place was quiet when I walked in. My parents were both at work. Nathan was supposed to be back at Duke by then, finishing his second year of pre-med. At least, that was the story everyone kept telling. I stepped into the kitchen and saw a stack of mail spread across the counter. Bank statements, a folder from the mortgage company, and one envelope that had already been opened. The letterhead caught my attention. Duke University. I shouldn't have read it. I knew that. But the paper was already halfway out of the envelope, and the first words were printed in thick red ink. Academic dismissal. I pulled the letter out slowly. 3 semesters of failing grades. Academic probation. Then dismissal. The date at the top was almost a year old. For a moment, I just stood there holding the paper, trying to fit that information into the version of Nathan Carter my parents had been advertising to the world. Then I noticed the other documents on the counter. Loan statements, home equity paperwork, transfers wired to something called Carter Biomedical Ventures. That's when the front door opened. My father walked into the kitchen and stopped the moment he saw me. My mother came in behind him and froze when she noticed the letter in my hand. "What are you doing here?" my father asked. "Getting my coat." My mother stepped forward quickly. "You shouldn't be going through our mail." It was already open, I said. My father took the letter from my hand and folded it once. Nathan decided Duke wasn't the right fit. After failing 3 semesters, my mother spoke before he could answer. He left to start a company. What kind of company? My father adjusted his tie the way he always did when he wanted to sound confident. A biotech venture. I looked down at the loan statement still sitting on the counter. $2,400,000, I said. Neither of them answered. That silence told me more than any explanation could have. Nathan wasn't a medical student anymore. He was a project my parents had already bet the house on. I grabbed my coat from the hallway and headed toward the door. My father's voice followed me. "You don't understand what it takes to build something." I turned back once. "I think I'm starting to," I said, because sometimes the golden child only shines as long as nobody turns on the lights. The lab at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center always smelled faintly of ethanol and stale coffee. Those were the scents that marked most of my life during those years. Long nights, careful measurements, more failed experiments than I could count. Doctor? Catherine Hayes ran the oncology lab with the kind of quiet authority that made people stand up straighter without being asked. The first day I met her, she looked at my file for about 10 seconds before speaking. "You're the transfer student from community college." "Yes. You understand, this kind of research destroys people who aren't serious." "I'm serious." She slid a stack of journal articles across the desk. "Then start reading." For the next year, that was our relationship. No speeches, no encouragement, just work and the expectation that you would either keep up or leave. Most of our research focused on lymphoma cells that had stopped responding to standard drugs. The problem was simple enough to describe and brutally difficult to solve. Treatments that worked in theory kept failing in the lab. One night, sometime after 2 in the morning, I was checking a set of control cultures under the microscope when something didn't make sense. The cells in the untreated control dish were dying. That wasn't supposed to happen. I checked the labels. Same timing, same environment, same preparation. The next day, I brought the data to Dr. Hayes. "You contaminated the sample," she said before I finished explaining. That was my first thought. And I repeated the experiment. And the same thing happened. She looked at the numbers in silence. "Run it again," she said. "New samples, new reagents." We ran it again, and again. 3 weeks later, the pattern still hadn't changed. Whatever reaction was happening, it wasn't the drug attacking the cancer cells. Something inside the cells was triggering a collapse, a kind of internal shutdown. Dr. Hayes leaned over the microscope one afternoon, studying the slides herself. "You're saying the compound is pushing the cells into a stress response," she said slowly. "Yes, and the stress response activates the failure pathway. That's what the data suggests." She straightened and folded her arms. "That shouldn't work, but it does." Even then, she didn't celebrate. She just gave another instruction. Repeat the entire series. Different cell lines, different labs. That process took almost 8 months. Independent teams confirmed the same reaction. The pathway held. One afternoon, she called the lab team together around the conference table. "There are 10 of us here," she said, holding the final report, "and every replication confirms the mechanism." Nobody spoke. Dr. Hayes finally looked at me. "You found the door." My throat tightened. "So we publish. We submit," she corrected. The review process took nearly a year, but eventually the paper was accepted by Nature Medicine. Dr. Catherine Hayes was listed as principal investigator. Under her name was mine, first author. A few months after publication, a pharmaceutical company negotiated licensing rights for the research. The agreement came to $18,500,000, funding further development of the therapy. When the contracts were signed, Dr. Hayes handed me another document. You're presenting the work at the Seattle Global Oncology Symposium. I've never spoken at something that big. She shrugged. You discovered it. I thought about that for a moment before asking something I hadn't said out loud in years. Do you ever think people can be wrong about someone for a very long time, Doctor? Hayes gave a small smile. Science is full of people who were underestimated. What I didn't know yet was that when the conference finally arrived, the people who had underestimated me the most were already sitting in the front row. When the paper was finally published, I didn't call anyone. Not my parents. Not Nathan. For years they had decided what my future looked like, and none of those versions included this moment. So instead of celebrating, I did something simpler. I went back to the lab. The printer in the hallway kept running all morning, producing copies of the journal article for reporters, university staff, and a few investors who had already started asking questions. The sharp smell of warm ink and fresh paper filled the room. Doctor Hayes walked in carrying one of the printed copies. You've seen it? She asked. More times than I can count, and I keep expecting someone to find a mistake. She gave a short laugh. The reviewers spent almost a year trying. The title page was simple. Catherine Hayes, Amelia Carter. My name was listed first among the authors. Doctor Hayes tapped the page with one finger. This changes things, she said. I'm still working in the same lab. That's not what I mean. She nodded toward the phone vibrating on my desk. Reporters, investors, conference organizers, people who had never heard my name 2 weeks earlier were suddenly asking for meetings. One call came from a pharmaceutical company that had been following the research during the review process. The representative spoke quickly, the way people do when they think they're catching an opportunity early. Our company is interested in licensing the pathway you identified, he said. We're prepared to offer $18,500,000 for development rights. Doctor Hayes looked over at me. Well, she asked quietly. I stared at the paper again before answering. That would fund a lot of research. The man on the phone laughed. You scientists always say that. Negotiations took several weeks, but the agreement eventually went through. The licensing money would support further development of the treatment and expanded the lab's work. Not long after that. Doctor Hayes placed a printed schedule on my desk. You're presenting the research at the Seattle Global Oncology Symposium next month. I've never given a keynote. You will now. Across the city that same week, my father walked into his office and found the new issue of the journal waiting on his desk. Someone from his firm had circled a name on the title page. He read it once, then again. Amelia Carter, his daughter. And for the first time in his life, the story he had always told about me stopped making sense. When the presentation ended, the room filled with noise almost immediately. Researchers moved toward the stage first, followed by investors and reporters. Everyone seemed to have a question ready. Dr. Carter, could you clarify the signaling pathway? Is the therapy moving toward clinical trials? Who funded the earliest phase of the research, Doctor? Hayes stepped beside me and said quietly, Take a breath. I nodded, but my attention had already drifted toward the front rows. My father was standing. His phone was still raised, recording the stage. Of course it was. As I stepped down from the platform, he made his way through the crowd with the same confidence he used in courtrooms. Amelia, he said, smiling as if we had seen each other yesterday. He opened his arms. I placed my hand against his chest before he could get closer. Richard. The smile paused. My mother stood behind him, watching the room nervously. Nathan lingered a few steps back, thinner than I remembered, his hands buried in his pockets. My father lowered his arms. Let's not make a scene, he said quietly. You came to my conference. We came to support you. The words sounded rehearsed. Nathan cleared his throat. Your presentation was impressive. You never liked science, I said. He looked down at the floor. At that moment, Doctor Hayes appeared beside me. Everything all right here? My father's voice changed instantly, smooth and professional. Of course, he said. I'm Amelia's father. Doctor. Hayes studied him for a second. Good to meet you, she said. Then she walked away. My father leaned closer. We need to talk. About what's somewhere private. We stepped into a small conference room behind the stage. The door closed, and the hallway noise faded. My father sat across from me at the table. We're proud of you, he said. I didn't answer. Nathan shifted in his chair. Our company has run into some problems. What company? The biotech venture, my mother said carefully. I looked back at my father. How much money did you lose? No one spoke right away. Nathan finally said, Almost everything. My father's jaw tightened. We invested more than $2,400,000. You mortgaged the house. My mother's eyes dropped to the table. Nathan leaned forward. You have investors now, he said. You could introduce us. You want my contacts. My father clasped his hands together. It would be a business arrangement. I reached into my bag and pulled out something small and glossy. The pink brochure, Seattle Institute of Cosmetology. I slid it across the table. You told me this was where I belonged. No one moved. For the first time that afternoon, my father didn't seem to know what to say. The room stayed quiet after I slid the brochure across the table. My father stared at it for a long moment, like it was something offensive. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. You're being dramatic. Am I? You've made your point, he said. Now, let's talk about something practical. Nathan leaned forward quickly. You have investors now, he said. People trust you. You could introduce us. You think the licensing deal belongs to me. My mother frowned slightly. Doesn't it? No. I opened my bag and placed another document on the table. My father picked it up. A trust agreement. The licensing payment, I said. $18,500,000 went straight into that trust. Nathan blinked. You gave it away. Not exactly. My father's voice hardened. Then where did it go? To the lab and to a fellowship program? For what? For women studying cancer research who don't have rich parents. My mother looked at the document again. You named it after the family. The Carter Fellowship. Nathan leaned back slowly. So none of it helps us? No. My father placed the papers down carefully. You're turning your back on your family. I stood. You turned yours first. No one tried to stop me when I walked out. Later that night, Dr. Hayes handed me a glass of champagne. How was the family reunion educational? She laughed. And somewhere between the lab and the stage, I learned something simple. People will tell you who they think you are. You don't have to live inside that story. Sometimes the best answer isn't revenge. It's building a life they can't control. If you've ever had someone decide your limits for you, you probably understand exactly what that feels like.